Hi, welcome back to Give Me the Bible, where God's Word speaks for itself. We've been talking about the importance of applying proper methods of interpretation when trying to understand what God is telling us in the inspired pages of the Bible. And we've talked about historical context and genre and textual context. But I just want to elaborate on the historical context video that I made. I want to make sure that when people understand this concept that the Bible was written to a specific people in a specific culture, and the cultures, depending on what book you're reading, would be a little bit different. But I don't want people to get the impression that, okay, well, if it has to do with something cultural, then, well, it just doesn't apply to us anymore because our cultures change, and so it's just pointless. You might as well just not even read that verse or that passage because there's nothing we can get out of it. I don't want anybody to get that impression. No, the key is we have to learn to separate the universal principle taught in a passage and separate that from the cultural application of that universal principle. Let me give you an example. Look in Romans 16 with me. Romans chapter 16 and verse 16. It simply says this. Romans 16:16, greet one another with a holy kiss. All the churches of Christ greet you. Now, when we read that, understand that the people who this letter was written to, the church at Rome in the first century, it wasn't really a surprise to them to hear that Paul told them to greet each other with a holy kiss. I mean, it wasn't like, okay, they've never kissed anyone before, and now Paul is writing this letter, and he's saying, okay, as Christians, now you may not used to kiss people, but now that you're a Christian, well, now you need to start kissing people. I mean, can you imagine the horror almost, the looks on their faces if they read a letter like this, and they're like, oh, what? Wait, what does he mean? Kiss somebody? I mean, does he mean like kiss them on the lips or on the forehead, or I mean, what is Paul talking about here? Well, notice that Paul doesn't give any detail. I mean, he just zooms right past it. Greet each other with a holy kiss, and all the churches of Christ greet you. And then he goes on and continues what he has to say. He doesn't elaborate on that at all. He doesn't explain it, and the reason he doesn't elaborate or explain that is because they all already knew that kissing each other was just a form of greeting. Just like we know in our culture today that shaking someone's hand is a form of greeting. And that's for us in America. But truthfully, if you go travel somewhere else, like Italy, for instance, in Italy, they still do greet each other with a kiss. They'll do an alternating kiss, from one cheek to the other, even if it's a person that you've never met before. I mean, that's just the greeting. Well, it was very similar in that first century world. And so, whenever you see an application here that has to do with culture, we don't want to just say, okay, well, he's talking about kissing people, so this passage has nothing to do with us. We can just skip right over it. Don't miss the universal principle. Okay, the universal principle is this: that however you're greeting your brethren, make sure that it's holy. Okay, the idea is don't be going up and kissing your brother when you're leading a sinful life, or kissing your brother when really on the inside you're harboring all kinds of bitterness toward him, or anger, or you're not willing to forgive that brother, and yet you're coming in and you're kissing him. No, he says make sure that when you greet one another, it's with a holy kiss. And that's the principle we need to take, that not that, okay, now we 2,000 years after this is written, now we're bound to kiss each other. We have to kiss each other, and that's an application Paul was getting at. No, but when we greet one another, let's say in the U.S. with a handshake, as Christians, we need to make sure that it's a holy handshake. So I just want to point out the difference between the universal principle and the specific cultural application of that principle. We might not apply that principle the same way culturally as they did, but let's not forget that there's a universal principle that's being taught that we can apply in different areas in our own culture. I hope that that's clear. Thank you so much for listening and for your interest in spiritual things. And Lord willing, I'll see you next time.